interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets of success. Welcome to the Private Equity Podcast with Alex Rawlings.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Jim Silvestri, current Chief Financial Officer at Wales-Darby, a distribution company. Welcome and thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today, Jim.
Thank you. Welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast.
Perfect. For those that don't know you, Jim, if you could give us a 60 to 90 second breakdown of you, please.
Sure. I've been in the finance field for about 30 years now. Spent pretty much the last 20 years or so in manufacturing and distribution. Earlier in my career, I've got some retail experience. I've worked for both public and privately owned businesses. But really the last 20 years has predominantly been in family-owned businesses. And again, like I said, in the manufacturing and distribution space. And really the last 10 or so years has been tied specifically to the construction industry as a supplier of either fireproof doors and architectural hardware or lighting and electrical supplies and now HVAC distribution. Really, I think one of the key things about my career is I started out early as a cost accounting manager, and that's really where I cut my teeth and learned what drives a business and really how to understand how to dissect a business and the different components. And then also during my time in the manufacturing space, I do have a bit of a lean manufacturing background, which has really helped me develop my skills in process improvement, and also have been through a variety of ERP implementations and migrations. So that's kind of the 60-second elevator speech.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. So what one mistake do you see either private equity firms or their portfolio companies making, Jim, and what would you suggest to correct them?
Well, in my experience, in the transition, the exit that I went through, it seemed we were acquired by the portfolio company, and the portfolio company was predominantly a distribution company. And one of the things that made LIF unique was that they were, in addition to being a distributor, they were a manufacturer. And I think the portfolio company didn't spend enough time getting to understand the nuances of the manufacturing component. And since they were, all the companies that they had acquired previously were distribution companies, they didn't have that manufacturing expertise. And I think they didn't spend enough time getting to understand how that piece of the business ran and how it was really critical to the success of the future of not just the acquired company, but the portfolio company as well.
So you mentioned about the element of not getting to know enough. What specifically did they, not understand, not dig deeper into? What would, if that scenario played out again, what would be your suggestions to the PE guys, the portfolio company to get that right?
Yeah, I guess the overall understanding of the manufacturing process, the focus seemed to be, obviously it was at a critical time, shortly after the acquisition. The main raw material component was steel, and steel prices, post merger skyrocketed. So the focus was all about raw material costs, and not understanding that there were still significant opportunities, whether it was through a lean implementation or other opportunities, just to really understand how the doors were made. What was the and how the demand flowed and what the capacity was. We were running, basically a shift and a half, and had more capacity. Could have easily been supplying product to other divisions that were kind of dispersed throughout the nation, as opposed to just kind of focusing on trying to figure out what they could do to manage the rising raw material cost.
Makes sense. So as you mentioned in your intro, Jim, you've got exposure both working with private equity backed businesses, particularly PIF industries, which we'll come into more detail certainly later, and also what I regard as typical family-owned type organizations. What would you say are the kind of key differences in your experience between a PE-backed business and a standard family-owned organization?
It's interesting. I had kind of drafted a response, and then I was thinking about it in a little more detail last night as I was preparing. And so I've kind of modified my answer a little bit. I think one piece is loyalty. When you work for a family-owned business, there seems to be, and I've worked, over the course of my 30-year career, I've worked for a couple of toxic environments too, and even in those toxic environments, loyalty was still a thing in the family-owned business. They want to take care of the long-term employees, and sometimes to a fault. And in the PE-backed business, the focus is more about hitting the numbers, and if you're not hitting the numbers, changes need to be made. But the other piece that I find interesting is in a lot of family-owned businesses, the finance function is seen kind of as a cost center and not viewed always as a strategic partner to the organization. And in the PE space, that's completely different. The finance department is really the one that's respected and the one that's driving change and the one that is ensuring that the targets are being hit. So it's both good and bad differences.
Absolutely. And to go into that particular exit, that particular deal that you did within private equity backed organization, significant revenue growth within that business, significant EBITDA turnaround, which we spoke about prior to going live. We won't share the numbers, obviously everything's confidential, but with having completed that exit with a PE backed organization, what did you specifically learn through that process that you would have done differently or you would do differently next time and in the future?
Well, one of the things, it's not necessarily what I would do differently. I'll answer that as well. But I think one of the things that going through that process, you really learn how to slice and dice the business. There are so many more facets to analyzing revenue than just sales by customer. You're looking at who and let's talk about construction industry specifically, right? You're talking about who is the customer? Is it new construction or is it a renovation project? Are you selling directly to an owner developer? Are you selling to a general contractor? Are you selling to a subcontractor? Are you looking at, is it a residential building? If it's a residential, is it a condo? Is it low income housing? Is it a government building? So there's so many different ways to look at who the end user is, not just who the customer is. And you're looking at, not just what are my sales, but what is my pipeline? What is my backlog? How many quotes do I, what's my quote? How many quotes do I have out on the street? What's my close rate? So you're not just looking at, historical numbers. They really want to get a sense of where the revenue is going to be on a go-forward basis. So I think having gotten through that process, what I've learned and what I do differently, and even now in my new role, is I'm digging deeper into the numbers, not just looking at that top level. Oh, great, revenue is up 10% or revenue is up 20%. It's why is revenue up 20%? What specific target? What customer is driving that? What type of customer? Where, or end user? And how do we drive continued growth? How do we create demand in that sphere or create greater demand in that sphere to ensure that we're continuing to grow at this rate or even at a greater rate?
Makes sense. And if you look at that, obviously driving that business preparing that for an exit, pretty decent exit multiple that you achieve within that business, which is above what I regard as industrial manufacturing type industry standard and distribution, etc. What would you say, looking back, helps drive an increase? Because everyone's looking for that extra X on the exit multiple process. What from your experience allowed you to be able to get a higher than average for an industrial business kind of exit multiple there?
Well, I think there were a couple of factors at play, right? You talk about the different types of buyer. Financial buyer, obviously, you're not going to get the same multiple as a strategic buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And we were a strategic fit, and we knew the portfolio company really wanted to add us to their mix. So we did have a little bit of leverage in that, from that standpoint. But again, being able to show that the growth wasn't, the growth was sustainable, and we had a great understanding of the business. We were in the process of transitioning really from first generation to second generation, and the second generation was actively involved in growing the business. And you're going from one person in generation one to three kids actively involved in the business that were really roll up their sleeves. So it was showing that there was a viable succession plan in place, and that the growth wasn't just a sell, and I think one of the things you see in different deals is the ownership was committed to staying on. They wanted an equity stake in the new venture, and they were also when you look at EBITDA, the big word in the PE space is normalized EBITDA, right? So you're looking at what normalizations could we make, and ownership showed they were committing to making some changes. Typically in a family-owned business, you have some compensation that's not always in line with what it's going to be in the future. So when ownership says, okay, we realize that this is what a reasonable CEO wage is on a go-forward basis, so the PE firm respects that, that they're making those concessions, and that they're committed to the success of the overall, future of the combined entity.
Makes sense. Sorry to interrupt here. Just a quick note to highlight our new sponsor, Grata. The private equity market is rapidly shifting to a data-driven, proprietary deal sourcing standard. Grata provides the window into over 7 million middle market private companies. Contact Grata so you can access the market first. Request a demo at www.grata.com. Now back to the podcast. And I know from speaking about that deal and other types of work that you've done briefly as we spoke prior, you talked a lot about kind of ERP implementation. What we tend to hear from private equity firms is this is always a challenging area for any organization, especially first-time private equity deals. They lack a formal process or even a formal ERP system. So what kind of tips would you give another executive implementing a new ERP into an organization?
I think there are three things really. Discovery, and in my opinion, is the most critical step. You really need to understand how the business operates and what are the must-haves versus what are the nice-to-haves. Anytime you're doing an ERP implementation, you run the risk of really upsetting the business or disrupting the business. So you have to be able to say, these are the critical success factors to my business. My ERP system must be able to manage these 10 things. It would be great if it could do this, this, and this, but it has to do these 10 things. The other piece really that is critical to success is ownership and leadership involvement. a lot of times you can be in a situation, like I said, I've worked across multiple companies, been through the process many times, and the biggest failures have occurred when leadership says, okay, we're going to implement this ERP system and then step away. They've got to be in the forefront saying, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and they've got to be the biggest cheerleader, and if not, it's going to fail. And a lot of times too, the employee engagement is critical, especially in a PE situation where you have somebody coming in and buying the business that may not fully understand it. When you're implementing an ERP system, the people that are doing the work every day are the ones that know what has to get done. So getting engagement from the people that are actually on the front lines doing the day-to-day work, understanding what their pain points are and the way they currently do their job. How can a new ERP system make their lives easier? Because again, like I said, in that situation where you're buying, where it's a family-owned business that's being acquired, you've got loyalty, you've got people that have been there a long time, and people that have been there a long time are typically resistant to change. So if you don't get their feedback and include them, it's going to make the process much more difficult as well.
Makes sense. So, Jim, what do you love about the private equity industry, and equally, what do you dislike about it?
I love the challenge. To be a CFO in a PE-backed environment, you've got to be at the top of your game. There's you're playing at a different level. There's a lot of high-powered, really smart people in the PE space, and so, like I said, you want to be in that space because there's a certain amount of pride that goes along with that, and being able to accept that challenge, be successful in that role at that level with that kind of pressure. But that's the flip side, is that pressure. The work-life balance can become a challenge, especially when a person like myself has a tendency to become consumed by the work in that situation where, those 70 to 80 hour weeks may become required. It can be difficult to balance things.
Cover it off. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? You've got, sometimes these businesses can take 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 100 years to grow to the levels that private equity do in, obviously, an ideal scenario of 3 to 5. So it doesn't just come from hiring an army of people. It comes from building a very strong management team and C-suite team that then have to then drive and deliver that through effective decision making. But obviously, like anything, comes with that hard work and drive and determination and putting the hours in of any like any deal, I suppose, and any business in growing. That's right. But in these short phases, I'm curious, Jim, what advice or what do you wish you'd known before you'd gone into your first private equity backed deal? What would you say? Do you know what? Before I went in, this is what I wish I'd known before I'd started with this.
Well, I have two answers to that. One is professionally and one is personally.
Okay.
Right. And I guess I'll start with the personal. Personally, I wish I had advocated for myself a little stronger and a little louder, because, I may still be in that environment now had I done that. And I think the second thing is, from professionally, again, I feel like I honed my skills in terms of how to look at a business, how to really understand what the revenue drivers are, what the EBITDA drivers are, and I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to data, anyway. But again, love pivot tables, love VLOOKUPs, and just really understanding how to look at massive amounts of data and make it tell the right story. Because again, at the end of the day, one of the ways you're getting that multiple is by being able to tell a great story, and the numbers are really the driver for that.
Excellent. And What are your influences? What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen?
I'm more of a reader, but it's kind of funny. I recently read Atomic Habits, and now I'm becoming a listener. Now becoming a listener too, because I find that I can be more efficient if I'm combining exercise with listening to a book, as opposed to working out and then sitting down and reading for a half hour. But my biggest influences early on, Tony Robbins, more recently, Simon Sinek, Gary Vaynerchuk, and most recently, Ryan Holiday. Reading a lot about macro patience, and it's, but executing, right? It's all about, you want to play the long game, and think about what's, always be thinking about 5 steps ahead. And even though I'm in my 50s, I still got a lot of road in front of me. So, patience is key, but you still got to execute every day. So that's, those are kind of the main influences right now.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm a big reader myself. Atomic Habits is one that I've definitely read. What books would you recommend? What are the ones that kind of stand out and made the biggest impact for you?
Atomic Habits is definitely one. Gary Vaynerchuk's latest book, 12 and a half.
Jab, right hook. He's brought out another one, I think.
Yeah, he wrote Jab, right hook, but his most recent one is 12 and a half. It's about the soft skills and the soft skills that are required that make a great leader. And I just read the 3 books by Ryan Holiday, and I'll be reading his 4th book, Discipline. It's about discipline. That'll be the next one I download.
Yeah, perfect. And if anybody wants to reach out to you, Jim, post this conversation, how best do they get in touch, please?
Best way is email, which is jimsilvestri70@gmail.com. Or, and then if they want to extend it further, I'd be happy to share, more contact information, a phone number.
Yeah, perfect. We can put that in. We'll drop your LinkedIn in there as well, Jim, in case anybody wants to connect on there. Well, Jim, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your insight into working in a private equity-backed business and your expertise of achieving incredible exit within the industrial distribution space. Absolutely impressive. So thank you very much for sharing your time and all your insight today.
Thank you. I appreciate being part of the podcast.
Perfect. And for all those listening, thank you very much for joining us. Should you ever need support with your private equity professionals, or of course your portfolio executive hiring, please do reach out to me at Rural Selection. And if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe and you'll be notified of the next podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks. But till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Private Equity Podcast on www.raw-selection.com.